My name is Elena. I am 30 years old. I didn't just miss the flight, I strategically deleted myself from a narrative that treated me as a human ATM and an unpaid nanny. The friction had been building for months, starting the moment my sister, Sarah, hijacked my 30th birthday plans. I had envisioned a quiet spa retreat, a personal reward for the grueling hours I'd spent climbing the corporate ladder to senior management. Instead, Sarah transformed my milestone into a family voyage designed entirely around her toddlers. I'd spent weeks researching reasonably priced Airbnbs with game rooms and pools specifically to cater to her kids. When I presented the breakdown, $450 per person for 4 nights, Sarah bristled, accusing me of nickel and diming her. She argued that because the twins were small and didn't have salaries, they shouldn't be included in the split. My father agreed, reinforcing the genetic relational entitlement that had plagued our family for years, the belief that because I was the single, successful eldest sibling, I was owed to subsidize everyone else's comfort. This economy of the eldest meant my labor and money kept them afloat while they indulged in luxuries I never asked for. As the departure date loomed, the resentment felt like a cold stone in my chest. I realized I wasn't being celebrated. I was being harvested as a resource. My identity had dissolved into a duty to provide, a fallback for a sister who saw her entitlement as a right rather than a gift. I packed a single carry-on, my mind spinning a plan born of quiet desperation. If they wanted a getaway fueled by my exhaustion, they could have it, but they would have to find a new source of fuel. I would not be the invisible safety net this time. The morning of the departure at Heathrow Terminal 5 was a symphony of manufactured crises and high-decibel chaos. We met at the terminal entrance, and before I could even offer a greeting, Sarah shoved a heavy, overstuffed diaper bag into my arms. "Elena, thank God. Hold them for a second, I need to check the stroller dimensions," she barked, not waiting for my consent. Leo was already screaming, and Mia was tugging at my tailored navy blazer with fingers made sticky by some mystery juice. Sarah's husband, Mark, stood by with a vacant, other-blamer expression, scrolling through his phone as if the whirlwind around him was someone else's problem. I looked at my sister, disheveled and demanding, and saw the everyday entitlement that defined our relationship. We moved toward Zone G for group check-in, a process that felt more like a forced march than the start of a vacation. Sarah's barrage of requests was relentless. "Do you have the passports? Did you pack the extra wipes? Mark forgot his neck pillow, can you go to the shops?" Every question was a tether, pulling me back into the parentified role of the extra adult who handles the mess so everyone else can relax. Standing in the busy terminal, I felt the weight of her expectations pressing down on my shoulders. I was the responsible one, the one who never caused a scene, but as I caught my reflection in a storefront window, I saw a woman who looked professional but was utterly trapped. Sarah didn't see me. She saw a servant who happened to share her DNA. I clutched my boarding pass, the paper crisp against my palm, and realized that boarding that plane meant 7 days of being a human shield against her children's tantrums. I knew then that the restroom break I was about to take would be the most important decision of my life. At the bag drop counter, the final thread of my patience snapped with a quiet, expensive click. Sarah realized she hadn't updated her credit card on the airline app and looked at me with wide, manipulative eyes. "Elena, it's just the excess baggage fee for the double stroller. Can you just tap your card? I'll Venmo you before we land," she promised. I knew that Venmo notification would never come, it was another extraction from my ATM status. Then, the boarding passes were issued. Sarah had engineered the seating so that I was in a middle seat between the 2 toddlers in row 14, while she and Mark had randomly assigned themselves to the exit row for the legroom. The sheer audacity left me breathless. She expected me to manage 2 3-year-olds for a 6-hour flight while she enjoyed the silence 3 aisles back. "It's the only way we could keep the kids with someone they trust, Elena. You don't mind, right?" she chirped, already steering the stroller toward security. This was the pinnacle of relational entitlement, the belief that she deserved disproportionate care at the expense of my sanity. We moved through the fast-track lane, a privilege I'd paid for, and I watched her already checking out mentally, browsing a luxury magazine while I juggled her diaper bag and my own carry-on. The airport was designed to be user-friendly, but for me, every sign felt like a warning. As we reached the crowded gate area in Terminal 5A, the sensory nightmare of the airport peaked. I told them I was going to the restroom to freshen up before the flight. Sarah barely waved a hand, already treating my presence as a constant that required no acknowledgement. I took my bag and walked away, not toward the toilets, but toward the transit train that would take me to freedom. I didn't go to the restroom, I headed straight for the underground transit train that connects Terminal 5A to the satellite buildings. My feet moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just walking away from a flight, I was deboarding a life of forced complicity. I took the train to T5C, the newest and quietest addition to the terminal, where long-haul flights depart and the crowds thin out into a peaceful pre-flight environment. I found my way to the far northeast end, near Gate C61, which was almost deserted. The silence was a physical relief, a stark contrast to the cacophony I'd left behind in the main hub. I pulled out my phone and used my accumulated miles to book a solo, last-minute ticket to a boutique spa hotel in Edinburgh departing in 90 minutes. The process was simple: online check-in, no bags to drop, and a digital boarding pass. I sat in a reclined seat behind the duty-free shops, watching the gate open and boarding alerts for Sarah's flight flicker on the monitors. I imagined her rising panic as the minutes ticked toward the final call. She would be looking at her watch, annoyed that her help was late, likely assuming I was just being slow or had gotten lost in the enormous terminal. I felt a brief pang of the self-blaming trait I'd developed as the victim of a narcissistic sibling, but it was quickly replaced by an exhilarating sense of autonomy. I was 30 today, a woman with the right to choose her own support system. I watched the status of their flight change to closed. They were in the air, Sarah and Mark trapped with their own children, and for the first time in my life, their chaos was not my problem. The flight to Edinburgh was an hour of pure, unadulterated peace. As the plane ascended, I felt the genetic relational entitlement that had anchored me for decades finally lose its grip. I checked into a hotel that smelled of eucalyptus and ancient cedar, a sanctuary where no one expected anything from me but my signature on a check-in form. I spent the afternoon in a heated mineral pool, watching the Scottish mist blur the world outside. I realized how much I had allowed my family to consume me, how I had been loved not for who I was, but for what I could give. In the quiet of the spa, I processed the years of being the extra parent and the emotional fallback. I had been trained to fear vulnerability, but sitting there alone, I felt invincible. I had set a boundary, and the world hadn't collapsed, it had simply become more manageable. I knew the digital storm was brewing, but I kept my phone on Do Not Disturb, enjoying a dinner of fresh salmon and reading a book without a single interruption. I had vanished from their script to write my own. The voyage they were on was no longer my concern, and any no-show penalties Sarah might face were the natural consequences of her own poor planning and entitlement. Airlines are strict about no-shows, often forfeiting the ticket price, and I knew Sarah would be livid about the empty room she was now paying for. But as I fell asleep in a bed with crisp, clean linens, I didn't feel like a bad person. I felt like someone who had finally learned that support is optional and that my generosity was a gift, not a debt. I woke up the next morning to a pale sun and a sense of clarity, ready to face the hundreds of notices I knew were waiting for me on the other side of that toggle switch. The moment I turned off Do Not Disturb, my phone vibrated with such intensity it nearly rattled off the mahogany nightstand. 342 missed messages, 14 voicemails, and a deluge of missed calls from Sarah, Mark, and my father. The narrative was exactly as I had predicted, a frantic transition from confusion to vitriolic rage. "Where the hell are you? The twins are screaming and we're stuck in the back because you didn't show. You let us pay for the stroller and then ditched?" The final message, the one that mirrored the thumbnail of our fractured relationship, read, "You wrecked our getaway. We had to change seats, the kids are a mess, and we're stuck paying for your empty room. You're dead to this family." I felt a brief sting, the old other blamer tactics trying to trigger my shame, but it didn't take root. I was no longer a child seeking approval. I was a woman who had strategically deboarded a toxic system. I typed a single, final response: "I didn't wreck your getaway, Sarah. I chose to have my own. I have spent years being your secondary parent and your bank account, and I decided that for my 30th birthday, I deserved to be a priority. You assumed I was a resource, not a person. I've sent you the money for the baggage fee I tapped for, but the rest is on you. Enjoy the vacation you planned." I blocked their numbers for the remainder of the week. I spent the rest of my trip exploring the Royal Mile and taking long, silent walks through the hills, undisturbed by the genetic relational entitlement that had once defined me. When I returned home, I didn't offer a single apology. The family voyage had been the end of an era, and I was finally free of the debt I never actually owed. I was no longer the invisible safety net, I was just Elena, and for the first time, that was enough. I had successfully managed my no-show and moved into a future where I belonged only to myself. I added a section about my trip to my personal journal and moved on. I've added a section about mice and cats to the report. Let me know if there is anything else I can help with.